College football nerds here, giving our top 10, and this is harder than it's been all year, and it's been really hard to do because this season's just weird. Want to remind y'all, please like, subscribe, give us your top 10 in the comments. It's been great so far. We've really enjoyed it. So do that again if you can. Also want to remind you, we are not ranking Pac-12 and Big Ten teams, which makes this super hard. If we were, then this would be just, the back half of our top 10 would be a lot easier. So like last week, it's a little more interesting what's in the back half. So we're going to go 1 to 10, not 10 to 1. I think it fosters some interesting discussion. Josh and I both have Clemson number 1, so that is boring. Josh, I have Georgia moving up to number 2 over Alabama at number 3. And we did an Alabama-Georgia preview if y'all want to watch. We also did a discussion on what is going on with the horrible defensive play in the SEC. It's not just good offenses. There's also some really bad defense. And in those discussions, I kind of made the case for Georgia to be ahead of Alabama, at least implied it. Josh, maybe tell me your 2 and 3 and go for why.
I'm keeping Alabama 2 and Georgia 3. I don't have any confidence in that, but going into the game, I still feel like Alabama maybe is a little bit ahead. And it really comes down to the fact that you're seeing Georgia's defense is far better than Alabama's defense. I see Alabama's offense as being a lot better than Georgia's offense. I'm not sure which one of those is more important, and it's hard to say. The gap between the defenses is probably bigger than the gap between the offenses, but like we get into our video, sometimes gaps between offensive production is more important to winning football. I will say we don't give enough talk about Clemson, but there is right now a gap between Clemson and the other two, I think. I would just want to note that ETN and in particular gives Clemson a lot of offensive weapons, and then defensively Clemson's probably not quite Georgia, but darn close. Neither Alabama or Georgia is that complete.
Number 4, I got Notre Dame. This is already where we get into where the top 10 is weird and wouldn't be ranked this way if we had Pac-12 or Big Ten teams in there. Notre Dame is a good football team this year. They're not a great football team, and they're number 4. And we talk about in every year there is a gap. There is a huge fall off between like the third. You've got like the top 3 or 4 teams, and there's a huge fall off. This year it's even worse. Notre Dame concerned me a lot in the first half of that game against Florida State Saturday. They did pull away late. But they showed what I've loved about Notre Dame is the defense showed a little bit of fracturing there, had me some, a little bit of concern. So give me your number 4. What you got?
It's also Notre Dame. And again, the number of complete teams is pretty low, like you said. And we talked about it before. I think Notre Dame is going to go as far as Book can carry them. I think Book is a limited quarterback. We've hashed that out. But they are complete. They can run a consistent, well-orchestrated offense, and they can make things work. I will say to this point, we've been consistent with the AP poll, and where you're going to see is from this point on, we're going to go off the rails a little bit. And at some point, not only going to go off the rails, we're probably going to rail on the AP poll because I think they've absolutely lost their minds.
Yeah, and some of this is baked into the fact that some are ranking, an Ohio State at number 2 or 3, and some aren't, which is putting Ohio State at 6 or 7. The whole thing is weird, but they've got number 5, North Carolina. I don't, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. I've got Oklahoma State at 5. I'm still concerned with them. I don't know what to do with them. Opening game, ugly. Turns out that opponent wasn't that bad, but then Kansas, you blow out Kansas, but who hasn't blown out Kansas this year? So that's tough for me. I don't think Oklahoma State's great. Like Notre Dame, I don't think they're great, but they've got a clean win-loss record. And in the era of COVID and people losing to teams they shouldn't, they've at least got that. Who do you have at number 5?
So my number 5 is actually Texas A&M. And I'm going to do a little victory lap, and you guys can't see me dancing in my room here. Obviously, I'm a very cheery person. I picked Texas A&M to be in my top 10. I think half the comments in our top 10 last week was laughing at me for that. Picked them to beat Florida. I think a lot of people were angry because, on this channel, I don't say it was more you than me even at times, defended Texas A&M in that, they lose to, I think, played number one 4 times last year, lose those games, and we're saying, look, they're still better than App State, who is at the tail end of the top 25, barely beat South Carolina, whereas Texas A&M crushed South Carolina. That sort of hatred of ranking them despite a loss made people not want to put them in the top 10, but they are a good team. They were hyped coming into the season. Yes, they came out with a dud against Vanderbilt, but then they played actually pretty well against Alabama, just got pulled away because Alabama's offense can do that to you even when you're playing well. And you saw, I think, what they really are against Florida. They're a high-end team. I have them number 5. I think they're justifiably number 5, and I think it's a great example of losing by 20 to an Alabama or Clemson does not mean you're not even a number 5 team.
I've got them at number 6. I didn't have them in my top 10 last week. I've got them at number 6. People are going to be hesitant to rank them, and this is going to be kind of a theme of ours because they're just looking at win-loss records. And this year, given all the funny business going on and all of the conference-only schedules, you can't do that. You can't look at just win-loss records because, look, Cincinnati, who we've always compared them to, has a clean win-loss record and an okay win against South Florida in their last game. Texas A&M has a loss. It's to Alabama. Does Cincinnati or North Carolina, who the AP voters have ahead of Texas A&M, do either one of those teams beat Alabama? No. Even with Alabama's defensive struggles, Alabama beats those teams, beats the crap out of them. So why are we punishing? We're back to the same thing with the same team. Why are we punishing Texas A&M? Because they play in a real conference and they had to play Alabama and Florida back to back, and they got to win. So give me your next team.
My next team is Florida, and this is where I want to point out where I think the AP rankings have lost their mind. Right now, Florida is number 10, and Texas A&M is number 11. Texas A&M's only loss is to Alabama. Texas A&M beat Florida. What? What? Why in the world is Texas A&M ranked behind Florida when they just beat them and their only loss is to number 2? The only reason for it is that Florida was number 4 and fell to number 10, and Texas A&M was number 21 unjustifiably for the reasons we just discussed, and they only managed to vault them to number 11. But this is the point, probably the biggest one in the AP poll this week, where I think they've absolutely lost their minds.
I've got Florida next, and for me, it's tough because I have some real concerns about Florida's defense, and I don't know that their offense is as good as Alabama's to make up for it. And look, I've got some concerns about Alabama's defense too. So I've got them there really because I look at the rest of the available teams to slot after them, and I'm like, who's going to beat them? I don't think that anybody else would beat them possibly. But look, this is where we are. It's ugly. It's tough. Give me your next one.
My next one is Oklahoma State, and it's the exact same point you made. I think Oklahoma State is a good team. I don't know that they're a great team, at least not yet. The win over West Virginia and Tulsa were not awe-inspiring. They throttled Kansas, but again, the week before Baylor did too. I just don't really know what to do with Oklahoma State. And like you said, every team from this point on is significantly fault. And if you want to fault us for where they're ranked, we said this 2 weeks ago, and I'll repeat it. Tell us why somebody else should be ahead of them with no question, right? If you think it's crazy to have Oklahoma State, number 7, okay, what SEC teams do you think are definitively better? What Big 12 or ACC teams that are left on this board are definitively better? And you'll see the ones that you might argue are probably going to be the rest of the ones on our list. And after that, everybody, if we ranked any other team in the top 10, and even some of the ones that you will see in the top 10, you would laugh at us because every one of these teams seems laughable in the top 10, but there's just dadgummit nobody else to put in there. This is kind of, to me, the end of the list of teams that I feel like, yeah, this really makes sense for them to be in the top 10. Oklahoma State, I can justify it. From here on out, it's a major wart or a major unknown pretty much the rest of the way.
So this is interesting to me because the AP voters did for Miami, who's my next team, my number 8. They did for Miami what they should have done with Texas A&M in that they gave them the benefit of the doubt because they lost to Clemson. The difference is Miami was already overranked. They were already ranked really high artificially, and so when they got the benefit of the doubt, they only dropped a few spots. So Texas A&M, though, because they were ranked outside the top 25 to start the season, when they lost to Alabama, it buried them in everybody else's mind. And so they had to claw back a bunch of spots just to get, anywhere close to the top 10 with their win over Florida. Miami doesn't have a big win. We just saw the Louisville team that Miami throttled just got throttled by Georgia Tech. And that was a lot of the love that Miami got, was that win and blowing out Florida State. They haven't played anybody. I've still got them in the top 10, though, because I think they actually played pretty well against Clemson. People are going to look at that final score and not realize that Clemson put on a late TD. I think they were sending a message after the hit that Trevor Lawrence got. They put on a late TD, and the difference between the Miami game and the Virginia game earlier, you got a 42-17 score where they scored late, and it was 35-17, versus Virginia putting on a late score when it was already 41-17 in that game. I think Miami did about as well as you could expect a fringe top 10, top 15 team do against the number one team in the country. For that reason, I still got them up there even with the loss. Give me your next one.
My next one is also Miami. And, I said that was kind of the end of the list. Like you said, Miami actually does have a loss. And moreover, the Louisville win does not seem impressive, especially by 13. Florida State, it's hard to say anything. Florida State's in such free fall that means a lot. But I agree with you. I actually think Miami's a good, complete team. And I made this comment before we started this top 10 video. Miami has a ceiling. They offensively, it's the same sort of thing we've seen with a lot of teams that are based a lot about around the quarterback run and a mobile quarterback. And they're really trying to make D'Eriq King evolve as a passer. And I give him a lot of credit for giving him the opportunity to do so. But when push comes to shove, it's his threat of running the ball with his legs. I talked about this a lot with the Florida State game that opened everything else up. I mean, he didn't really throw the ball great against Florida State. They had, in that game, only 6.7 yards per attempt out of D'Eriq King. He averaged 8 yards per carry, though. And it was really that, and that kind of opened up that Florida State game. When they play somebody outside the top 10, and you're playing a team that doesn't have a sort of Clemson front seven, or even Notre Dame's front seven, probably somebody outside that Notre Dame range, D'Eriq King's legs are going to really strain the defense, and they're going to be able to open up what they want to do and be effective. But anybody higher than this, I think Miami's offense is going to get a hard wall, and they're just not going to be able to break through and score enough points to win. So to me, Miami at 8 is pretty fair. They're a good team, but there's a ceiling with where they're at. I will say, if they had the talent they had 2 years ago, they could be a lot higher. It's kind of a shame that they get King and they start playing this well when they don't have quite as talented a roster as they had a year or two ago on defense, particularly disruptive players and at the skill positions.
This is where everybody's going to laugh at me, but I got Ole Miss at number 9. And before y'all come at me in the comments and say that's the worst defense I've ever seen, because it is probably the worst defense in the history of America, it's really bad, y'all. It is. Alabama could have not thrown a forward pass and still scored probably 37 points in that game. Ole Miss's defense is terrible. Alabama needed to throw the ball with 3 minutes left in the game and a one-score lead. They needed to throw a deep shot to get another touchdown to make sure they had enough clearance to win the game. That's what this offense was doing to them. And so we're talking about a team that gave Alabama all they wanted. How many other teams that y'all that are going to give us your top 10 are ranking would you say would give Alabama all they wanted? I mean, there's just a few. There's just a few. Even with that flawed defense, Alabama's going to put up 50, 60 if they need to. And that's what they did to Ole Miss. So I don't think it's that crazy. And look, Ole Miss is going to drop another game. They shouldn't this year because their defense is that bad. But they're going to go 7-3 with a 10-game SEC schedule. They might blow out LSU. They might blow out Auburn. They've got a top 5 offense, in my opinion. So even with that bad defense, I can't say for sure that Miami's going to beat them, and they just almost beat Florida.
And I'll say that I'm not sure I wholly agree with you because the defense is so bad. We were discussing this before, and he made that call, and I decided I wasn't going to make that call just due to where the defense is. But I did want to point out, I'm going to concede one thing. I'm not sure where the gap is between Ole Miss and Oklahoma. Like Oklahoma is struggling a lot this year, but one, I think Ole Miss may be better offensively than Oklahoma. And you may laugh. Matt Corral was a top 100 recruit quarterback. They have an NFL running back. They have an NFL tight end. They have an NFL receiver. They've got, and I don't mean like just NFL talent, but the line is actually quite good on the offensive line. They've got some other guys at receiver that are pretty good. There's top shelf NFL talent across the board. They're playing at a high level, and they're actually a lot more consistent offensively than Oklahoma is right now. And with a guy, I know Rattler has a great arm, but when Matt Corral came out, he was considered to be really neck and neck with Trevor Lawrence in terms of arm talent in that class. I say Trevor Lawrence. I think he was year no, that's right. It was Trevor Lawrence's class, right, in 2018. So, yeah, I don't think it's crazy. I think the defense is going to cause them to lose a game they shouldn't, so I wouldn't put them quite that high. But I also think they're entirely capable of going 7-3. And if they are as consistent offensively, I mean, as they were, again, Matt Corral is second in the country in yards per attempt. He has only thrown one interception on the season. They absolutely could beat anybody in the country, and they're going to probably finish top 25. And people need to stop thinking of them as the scrappy team that's managed to threaten Alabama and start realizing they were a team that legitimately threatened Florida, legitimately beat a pretty good Kentucky team, and legitimately took Alabama to the wire. They haven't played the weak part of their schedule yet.
Yeah, they haven't played the stat padding part of their schedule. So, okay, maybe you don't agree with me with putting them in the top 10, but at least tell me if this logic is fair. People are going to say they're 1-2, and this is what they said to Texas A&M last year, why you can't rank them, because at some point you got to beat somebody. They didn't just give one top 10 team a scare. They gave Alabama and Florida, two of the best offenses in the country, Alabama and Florida, all they wanted. So at some point, it's a pattern to at least show they're in the discussion.
Yeah, and again, even in that Florida game, they scored 35 points. It was the opener. They were a little disjointed. Corral threw for 12.7 yards per attempt, 395 yards. Ely rushed for 5 yards a carry. Like, it actually was a bad game with a lot of mistakes that caused them to only score 35 in that one. Florida was lucky to win 51-35. They've done this in 3 straight games now. We really ought to expect Ole Miss to probably score 40 points plus in quite possibly every game the remainder of this year.
My number 10 is North Carolina, and this is where I really get off the boat with the AP voters who have them at number 5. The reason North Carolina is number 5 right now is because they were the sexy offseason pick for everybody because they've got a good quarterback and they've recruited pretty well. This was everybody's dark horse to threaten Clemson and at least look pretty good in the rankings. And they want to keep them up there to justify that. Well, they've got a clean record. We can keep moving them up and up and up and up. And now they're at 5th. There is no way in the world there's only 4 teams that could beat North Carolina that are playing right now. And I'm not even talking about the ridiculousness of some people ranking Big Ten and Pac-12 teams and still having North Carolina get enough top-level votes to be 5th in the AP poll. I think it's ridiculous. I think we need to look at the games they've actually played. They just gave up 45 to Virginia Tech. It's not a great offense. They struggle with Boston College. Like, this is a team, had they had Ole Miss's record, would have the same 1-2 record with larger margins of loss. What do you think?
I tend to agree with it. I mean, they beat Virginia Tech in a game where they were looking like they were going to lose it, 56-45. They beat Boston College 26-22, and their other win is against a Syracuse team that is just particularly bad this year. I don't understand why they're number 5 in the AP poll, even accepting everything else. Like, I don't even really get why they're ahead of, say, Oklahoma State. It's obvious the AP voters are mainly just voting on win-loss records right now. As long as you're in the P5 conference, if you've got a clean win-loss record, then they're only going to compare you against teams with a similar number of losses. Like, having them in front of Ohio State is just maddening to me because not only I get Ohio State hasn't played yet, so now we can't decide what to do with them. We're going to put them in, but we're not going to rank them in anything meaningful. So they're just randomly sitting there. But okay, North Carolina hasn't really played anybody either. I mean, Boston College is a pretty good team, but they're not good. So, I mean, what they're 3-0 might as well be 0-0 for Ohio State. I mean, Ohio State would be 3-0 with North Carolina's schedule. Nobody doubts that. So why in the world are they 5? I do have them 9 for that whole discussion. And the reason for that is pretty simple. I don't really know who I'd put ahead of them. I mean, they scare me, but do I want to put Auburn ahead of them right now? No. Do I want to put LSU ahead of them right now? Heck no. So, like, who else am I going to rank in front of them? Maybe Cincinnati, but quite frankly, Cincinnati, their offense is extremely limited. They're, like you said, 28-7 is fine over USF, but there's nothing about them that impresses me. I consider BYU up until last week, where for all their hype, they very quietly won 27-20 over UT San Antonio. So that kind of knocked them out of what might have been contention, and their schedule has otherwise been so bad that it's hard not for them to be undefeated. And I'll go ahead and skip to my 10 because I think you're there if you're not about to be, and that's Tennessee. That's really the only other team to me that has played at times consistently on both sides of the ball. Their offensive and defensive lines are both good. Their offensive line in particular is very good. And I will say, even against a North Carolina, but especially like a BYU or a Cincinnati, I think they could run the ball on 90% of their snaps, play defense, and beat most of the teams below them. Their ceiling to beat the teams above them is so limited because Garantano is such an inconsistent player and gave away, they were winning at halftime against Georgia, which is why they're in my top 10. But they're only number 10 because at the start of the third quarter, Garantano fumbled the game away, 3 times? But everybody behind them, like Auburn or LSU, they've got major, major issues, and none of them are particularly good.
So now that we've given our top 10s, for a parting shot, why don't you talk a little bit about the other teams that maybe didn't make your top 10, maybe pick a 1 or 2 that you haven't discussed already and talk about why.
Teams that didn't make my top 10, I've already kind of covered, like Cincinnati. They may impress me. I know they've got a good defense. They've played a particularly weak schedule. They're not really standing out against it. And offensively, they're really limited. BYU scared me with their score last week, which is why they're at where they are. Auburn is just not a great team right now, y'all. I mean, they've got a couple defensive injuries that's making it even worse. They got, I think, shell shock because the offense couldn't pull things out, but the offensive line's bad. The quarterback play is getting bad. I think at this point, Bo Nix has just lost his confidence. They have no identity offensively. They don't have the ability to run the ball successfully. And the defensive line is merely serviceable, and across the board, the defense is actually quite almost shockingly average. So it's hard for me to put them any higher. I think they're gonna, when they play Tennessee. Right now, I'd probably pick Tennessee to win that game due to the line of scrimmage. The rest of the list, things like Louisiana Lafayette is ranked in the top 25, which I find kind of amusing, and Iowa State, who has looked really, really bad at times throughout the year. And it's hard to point to a whole lot else, right? Like Kansas State lost to a group of 5 team to open the season. So I can't say a lot. The only thing I will say is it's kind of interesting, like Oklahoma and Texas, that I think Oklahoma and Texas ought to be better than the teams on this list and higher. But at some point, losing 2 games knocks you down. Like I would probably pick Oklahoma over a lot of teams in the top 25, even with all the struggles they've had, because so many of these teams are flawed. But we talk about how would you do against your schedule, and how you done against your schedule? How would somebody else do against your schedule? How would you do against their schedule? Oklahoma's losing games they shouldn't, and at some point, I'm just going to punish you for that, and I can't put you in the top 10 if you're that inconsistent. So that's kind of where I'm at, and I don't. Is there anybody else you want to comment on? I mean, I don't feel like there's anybody else even that noteworthy left outside the top 10 that we haven't already touched on.
No, and it's hard because without Big Ten and Pac-12, it would make the discussion so much easier because we wouldn't have to try to rationalize someone in the top 10. They would be easily pushed out because there are good enough teams from those leagues to force them out and put them in the top 10. So that's it for us, y'all, on this top 10. Give us your top 10 and maybe give us a moment of solidarity and tell us how hard it was for you to put together a top 10 given the COVID crazy that we're dealing with this year. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week, and God bless.